What would happen if the core city at the center of a suburban ring were to die? How long would the suburbs flourish if the central city around which they were clustered descended into chaos and despair? These are not pictures of Richmond. In fact, Richmond actually looks like this. But it is important to remember that the spoke of the suburban wheel is crucial to the health of the surrounding communities. Richmond, Virginia has long had an uneasy relationship with the counties around it. Henrico and Chesterfield surround it to the north and south, while Hanover, Goochland, Powhatan, New Kent, and Charles City hover on the periphery. In the early 1990s, a researcher named Dr. James A. Krupe was hired to interview metropolitan Richmond business leaders in Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico, and Hanover, and made recommendations for enhancing the economic future and potential for the region. 15 years later, in 2007, Dr. Krupe returned for a follow-up report and analysis of where the Richmond area had grown and needed growth. In his 2007 report, Dr. Krupe stated,
"Culturally, the metropolitan Richmond area is a tale of two cities. It is conflicted between old money roots and new money aspirations. It is proud of the past, yet embarrassed by it. It wants to grow, but doesn't want to change. The counties have excellent schools and fiscally strong county government. The city does not. The counties are booming. The city is not. The city has high concentrations of poverty. The counties do not. The city has public transit. The counties have limited public transit. The city has neighborhoods and buildings with architectural character and charm. The counties do not. Greater Richmond has individuals and companies who succeed with their individual projects, but have not figured out how to succeed as a group. The area operates more like siblings fighting than like family. The one word that characterizes the area is fragmentation."
Although some things have changed, especially when it comes to poverty spreading in the metro region, Dr. Krupe's words still reverberate today. What are the problems that face the Richmond metropolitan area today? One of them is poverty, which used to be largely confined to Richmond City. It is, however, no longer a problem just for the urban government and its services. There are now more people living in poverty in the counties than in the city, 54% in the counties to 46% in the city. In the Metro Richmond area, the percent of whites living in poverty has gone up from 4.7% in 1990 to 6.3% in 2009. The black population has remained close to 18% since 2000, while the Hispanic rate of poverty has jumped from 8% in 1990 to 23.5% in 2009. Notice the growth of the red block, which represents the Hispanic population. The Asian poverty rate has remained close to 10% over the last 10 to 12 years. While blacks and Asians have held fairly steady, it is among the white and Hispanic populations that poverty has grown. Meanwhile, what jobs exist are mostly not in the city. According to the Virginia Employment Commission, the region encompassed by Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico, Hanover, Powhatan, and Goochland gained over 80,000 jobs between 1990 and 2009. Unfortunately, the city lost over 40,000 jobs. In fact, the city lost about 3,500 jobs from 2002 to 2003 alone. In 1990, the red block, which represents Richmond, shows that the city clearly supported more jobs than did the counties. Almost 20 years later, Henrico County, represented by the white block, has reached and surpassed the city of Richmond in job creation, and Chesterfield County, the green block, is not far behind. But this is not a competition. We want there to be job growth in each of our regional sectors. Henrico has the most successful economy of the region, but the lack of public and private transportation hinders workers in the city from getting to jobs out in the counties.
Nowadays, economic development, to be done right, to be done well, to be done effectively, has to be regional, in the sense that there is something called a local economy, and we define that when we teach it as the area within which people live, work, and shop. Another way to say that is the commuting shed, meaning that The city of Richmond doesn't have its own economy. Chesterfield County doesn't have its own economy. They are part of the Richmond regional economy. And so when we are developing, further enhancing, growing that economy, we have to think about all the parts, because a body's not just the arm and the head, obviously. It's got two legs and another arm. That's essentially, that's the right metaphor for thinking about a regional economy. So when we grow, we have to grow regionally. Now, the historical fact of the matter is we have independent political jurisdictions that were here long before the regional economy was, and they still have a value. In well-functioning regions, you can have lots of independent jurisdictions that are still collaborative, that still know how to work regionally, but then they have the advantage of being small enough that somebody can relate to them. So some communities have tried regional government, those kinds of structural changes, but that's not necessarily the way everybody has to go. It's fine to keep the independent political jurisdictions, but what's key to being successful at economic development is regional thinking. And that means that you don't say, okay, I can only think about Chesterfield or only think about the city. I've got to think about ways to grow the regional economy by working with other partners. Sometimes that means all the partners working together, but sometimes it also means 2 or 3 partners working together. Some of the most creative areas don't worry about who's on and who's off. For example, the Research Triangle area in North Carolina, they've got many more jurisdictions to work with than we do. But they are so invested in a continual dialogue about regional development that initiatives come up that some people come onto, some jurisdictions do, and some don't, and sometimes it's all of them together. That's really the best way to do regional development, is to think regionally, but still operate out of your existing political structure. The simple reason being, it's very hard to change political structures. It's not hard to change to get to regional thinking if you work at it.
Enticing new businesses into the landlocked city of Richmond is more difficult than into the counties, because they would have to demolish, clean up, and reuse old industrial space in the city, as opposed to lopping down a few trees in the spacious surrounding counties. And the huge disparities in wealth, both within the city and between some city and county residents, make it seem as if different groups are not even speaking the same language.
Well, I think that the enormous socioeconomic gaps that we have. Brookings Institute did a study of all cities in certain size ranges, and we were in the 200,000 size range city. And we had, as I remember it, the wealthiest census tract and the second poorest.
Poverty in the city, and increasingly in the counties, is only one of the problems faced by our metropolitan community. According to Dr. Krupe, the counties will face growing needs in areas of public safety, retirement services, investments in technology, and to provide for an increasingly multicultural public as its immigrant population swells. These challenges can be more effectively met if tackled not unilaterally, but rather as a united community. How did we arrive in this situation? Why is there such a concentration of poverty in African American neighborhoods in the city of Richmond? Poverty which weakens the city and therefore impacts its surrounding suburbs. The uncomfortable issue of race comes up frequently whenever the history of Richmond is raised. Many of those interviewed for this project claimed that race is the theme underlying most of the problems both inside Richmond and between the city and the counties.
The city is black, it's majority black, and the counties are taking on more and more blacks in the county, or minorities, and they just want nothing to do with the city. They don't want to help the city. They don't want certain types of people to be moving into the county, and they blame the city. And I've lived in Richmond all my life, and I've seen it that way.
Richmond is a much more racially conscious area of the state than any other place I've lived.
We don't have to go back to slavery or to the Civil War to see racial policies which are affecting populations today. The high concentrations of poverty mentioned by Dr. Krupe in his report have roots back to policies and actions taken in the early and mid-20th century. During that period, many African Americans in the city were working hard trying to better themselves. at the same time that white businesses along Broad Street were booming, anchored by Miller & Rhodes, Tallheimers and Sears department stores, in pre-integration Jackson Ward African-American businesses were also thriving. Eggleston's Hotel was a stop for traveling African-Americans who also dined in their restaurant.
My father's first business on 2nd Street was in 1928. He had a little restaurant on the corner of 2nd and Clay Street, and it was called the Lafayette. In 1938, my father bought 2 buildings at the corner of 2nd and Lee and made a hotel out of it. There was the dining room that seated 125 people and a snack bar that seated 20 people. That building was renovated again around 1952, the hotel building was. I built the first motel built by a black man in the history of the city of Richmond. There in the 600 block on North 2nd Street, half a block away from my father's hotel. And then right after that, I did the self-same thing. I built the first stereo station built and owned by a black man at the corner of North Avenue and Dove. And 2nd Street was considered the mecca of black business for the United States of America. It was called the Wall Street of the South, Black Wall Street of the South. That's back during that time. And I imagine a lot of people today are familiar with 2nd Street Festival. Well, believe it or not, every weekend was like that on 2nd Street. You couldn't walk from one side of the street to the other. Between Marshall and Duval Street, there were 123 black businesses on 2nd Street. They go from service stations to a department store, 2 Chinese restaurants, 2 pool parlors, and number of other small businesses in that area. But you could almost get anything you wanted on 2nd Street here in Richmond, from automobiles to caskets. Any black man came to Richmond stayed on 2nd Street, woman or man. We housed people like the Globetrotters. We used to house the basketball, football teams that came to play Virginia Union. I have a list, or a partial list that I got from the News Leader Times-Dispatch of some of the stars that stayed down 2nd Street, like Jackie Robinson, Campanella, Louis Armstrong, Mom's Mabel. And it's a list, it just keeps going on. Everybody came to Richmond, 5 stair steps, Jackson 5, Martin Luther King.
Under Maggie Walker's leadership of the Independent Order of St. Luke, they opened a newspaper, a department store, and the St. Luke Penny Savings Bank, which later became Consolidated Bank and Trust. Businesses operated by non-blacks in the community also provided needed services. Mr. Troy's Basement, at First and Clay, sold clearance items from Tallheimer's department store to black shoppers who were not able to peruse and try on garments at Tallheimer's. The Maggie Walker Theater and the Booker T, later known as the Empire Theater and more recently renamed the November Theater, were theaters located on Broad Street that catered to African Americans. The Hippodrome and Globe were also popular theaters in the area, both located on 2nd Street. Black families of all social classes lived and worked in the community. In the mid to late 1950s, the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike was built, cutting through the vibrant African-American hub of Jackson Ward and displacing 7,000 people and 10% of the black community. Whole neighborhoods were lost, and former homeowners forced into public housing. During the 1930s and 1940s, the Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation had agents assess the value of homes in the Richmond area and determine the likelihood that homeowners would be eligible for housing loans. Homes near black areas were significantly downgraded, and black areas themselves, regardless of the income of the homeowners, were deemed of low value. This is an original form used by an HOLC agent. Notice 5D on the form, which is to indicate the growth of the Negro population, and 5E, which lowers the value of the home because of the infiltration of Negroes. Redlining by banks and lending institutions contributed to segregating neighborhoods. The redlined areas in this map represent the contemporary neighborhoods of Church Hill and the East End. This clustering of the poor through federal and local policies and the inability of black families to gain upward mobility by assessing funds to enhance or upgrade the largest purchase of their lives, their homes, resulted in patterns of poverty which persist today. Rather than tackling poverty and economic growth together, the city and counties have often worked as if they were miles apart, and even as enemies rather than colleagues sharing borders.
The disparities that exist between the city and the counties, and yes, some of it's economic, a lot of it probably is economic, but we also, I think a lot of times the city is left to take care of the most vulnerable with less resources. So that's a huge burden.
The neighboring districts were not trying to accommodate children who had special needs, who were poor or limited or had some kind of shortcoming.
Counties and the city see each other as competition amongst themselves, and really we should be coming together and seeing these other states and other regions of other states as our competition. It involves a lot of trust, and to build that trust is not an easy thing, because you have to be able to really just be able to give up your quote-unquote power, your quote-unquote resources, and trust that the other person will do the same thing. Both of you have to be willing to do that at the same time.
Living and working in communities apart has resulted in and supported the continuation of misconceptions and misunderstandings about our regional neighbors. We don't just evaluate people based on wealth and access to power, we also judge people based on where they live.
One of the interesting things in Richmond, because we're very polite, Richmond's very polite, we don't say, oh, you're from the poor part of town. Oh, you're from that snobby old other side. What we say when we meet people is, well, hi, how are you? What part of Richmond are you from? Because geography in Richmond defines everything, and attitudes and relationships. And so we have an East End and a West End, but a North Side and a South Side. Okay. We know what that means. I live on South Side. I believe it is God's country. But South Side to a lot of people means, oh, those rednecks. Or, oh, all the Hispanics. Or, that means one thing. Someone else says, I live in the West End. And we all go, whoa, money. And then we go, you don't know where I live in the West End, and there's no money there. But what has happened is that we so stereotype each other by where we live and what that means, that we put up barriers.
So my ex-husband and I lived in the city, Richmond, for 15 years, 4 kids. We were in the city school system, big city supporters, and you know, when push came to shove and we ended up moving to the county, it was a reluctant move, I have to say, and because we had lots of preconceived notions about folks in the county, you know, and I have to say I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, some of the stereotypes, of course, are true. There are a lot of blondes, lots of blondes, but I sort of fit in, so that was okay. I have met many wonderful people, and I love the schools. Hate to say that, love the schools. Yeah. Let's see, when my two youngest did cotillion, so everyone comes downtown for this, right? And the 3rd Street Diner is literally around the corner, and these things are always Friday or Saturday nights. Well, the parents would never go there for a bite, you know, after the dance, because they were too afraid to walk downtown around the corner, because they thought they'd be mugged. You know, there's a big dance at Christmas time, and the kids all go out to dinner. It's not a huge ordeal, but are fancy. You know, some kids actually go to the Jefferson, but one of the mothers actually arranged Strawberry Street, which surprised me that anyone knew of it, and the other mothers didn't. And everyone loved it. They couldn't believe this was, you know, in the big bad city. You know, and then the reverse was, I think I've told you the story about I'm on the booster club, the athletic booster club, and they charge admission to all the sporting events, and they made a decision, I guess a while ago, not to charge admission to Freeman games when Freeman was playing one of the city schools, because they're in our, I don't know how they draw the districts, because the districts will include some Henrico schools, some city schools, some Hanover schools, and maybe one Chesterfield school. So TJ High School is in the Freeman zone, and so is John Marshall. So they just quietly didn't charge admission for anybody, not just the kids coming from those schools.
Yet we do have examples of successful city-county collaborative efforts. Maggie Walker Regional Governor's School, Center Stage, Leadership Metro Richmond, the Convention Center, the Richmond International Airport, the Math and Science Innovation Center, the Henrico New Kent Regional Jail, and the Richmond Chamber of Commerce. What are some other possible collaborative strategies? Number 1, revenue sharing. John Moeser, Senior Fellow at the University of Richmond Center for Civic Engagement and Professor Emeritus of Urban Studies and Planning at VCU, argues that one way to support regional collaboration could be through revenue sharing, which would be a win-win for all 8 Metro Richmond localities. Building of the Greater Richmond Partnership, the entire region could market itself as a group. If big business came to the area, a percentage of the profits could go to the entire region and could be used to fund regional projects and to dispel inequities and equalize disparities. This has worked in other localities. Minneapolis and St. Paul, for example, have a very effective revenue-sharing program. According to Henry Marsh, former mayor of Richmond, one of the attractive features of bringing CSX to this area was its perception of regional cooperation. Number 2, the city and counties can share experience and ideas. There is expertise that the city can offer to the counties, including experience with adaptive reuse of older buildings and neighborhoods, such as decommissioned school buildings and empty warehouses, which can be converted to condos, offices, and restaurants. Richmond City can also share methods of handling and decreasing violent crime. City and county schools could share ideas for meeting the needs of students living in poverty and welcoming and supporting students from racially, ethnically, and culturally diverse backgrounds.
Good. Okay, one thing the city is doing, which is really kind of inspiring, is to take the job training idea to a completely different level, because there's lots of wrap on job training is that you're just giving people a generic training program, but it's not a job at the end of it. So the incentive to participate is low, and ultimately it's not a good use of resources. But they've established a Richmond workforce pipeline concept, and it's really cutting edge. But the idea is to find the employer ahead of time, get a commitment from the employer to hire someone locally if they go through the right training process. And you're taking advantage of the fact that employers are struggling to find good, reliable people. And you have people who need work. So it's not the magic of the market. It doesn't work. You actually need something conscious to put the two together. This then becomes a model that can be taken to a regional level. You can see in Henrico, where you have Eastern Henrico, basically poverty level similar to the city. You can imagine them learning from what the city has been doing and adopting its own version of this program. And same thing for Chesterfield. And that's really good, because if Richmond, both as a city and as a region, gets the reputation for, hey, they can deliver people and train people for jobs, that makes this a lot more attractive to employers to come here in the future.
Number 3, shared delivery of services. There could be more effective firefighting and delivery of emergency services with city-county collaboration, instead of abiding within irregularly drawn boundaries and jurisdictions. Assessing healthcare needs, especially for a growing elderly population, would be vastly more efficient if we focused more regionally. City and county schools would also benefit from working together to offer services to the transient student population. According to Dr. James Krupe of the Krupe Report,
the solution to the region's economic future lies in creating a nexus that involves attracting talent, creating the environment that naturally attracts that talent, preserving the beauty of the natural environment, and having the infrastructure in place to ensure that workers can easily move around the region to access work and play.
The citizens of Metro Richmond need to collaborate to build that common future.
How do we begin to share resources so that it benefits everyone? Mm-hmm. And that will only be because we build the relationships needed, that we care about each other.
One week in every February is officially designated as National Brotherhood Week. This means that we're supposed to stop whatever we're doing, burning, killing, whatever, and love everybody else. And it's really quite a strain. Here's a song about National Brotherhood Week. Oh, the poor folks hate the rich folks, and the rich folks hate the poor folks. To hate all but the right folks is an old established rule, but during National Brotherhood Week, National Brotherhood Week, see Cassius Clay and Mrs. Wallace dancing cheek to cheek. It's fun to eulogize the people you despise, as long as you don't let them in your school. Oh, the poor folks hate the rich folks, and the rich folks hate the poor folks. All of my folks hate all of your folks. It's American as apple pie. But during National Brotherhood Week, National Brotherhood Week, New Yorkers love the Puerto Ricans 'cause it's very chic. Step up and shake the hand of someone you can't stand. You can tolerate him if you try.